Good evening and welcome. I'm Harold Holzer, and I have the honor of serving as the Jonathan Fanton Director of Roosevelt House. I know that when the lights go up, that's not a signal that a film is going to begin, but that's how we do it here. And I want to welcome you to this very special evening, and thank you for coming out in this frigid January weather, which happens to be happening in the first week of November. For those who are here for the first time, I think I owe you a little bit of background about where we are. I think probably most of you know, but this is the home that Franklin Delano Roosevelt's mother built for Franklin and Eleanor as a wedding present in 1908. So they moved here as newlyweds, and the house came with something of a condition, and that is that elder Mrs. Roosevelt, Sarah, was to live on the other side of the house. So there's one entrance from the street, and I don't know if you noticed it, two entrances once you get into the vestibule. And as soon as she came in, she declared that the dining rooms, which is where we had our sandwiches before this program, were a little too small for people of their exalted station. So she immediately broke through the walls, and as Eleanor later said, her mother-in-law was in her side of the house at the most unexpected moments for the next 30 years. We call it the first New Deal. And this was FDR's New York City headquarters. It was here he returned after winning the governorship of New York in 1928. It was here he returned to after winning the presidency, and it was here that he managed the transition from Election Day 1932 to Inauguration Day 1933, then 4 months, not 7 weeks. So we call it in our darker hours the Trump Tower of 1932, because this is where he conceived of the social safety net that became the foundations of the New Deal. Social Security was conceived a few floors up in his private library. Minimum wage, child labor laws, and the first outlines of the recovery program that saved the United States. Just brief post-war history, then I'm going to revert back, or post-presidential history, still pre-war. Sarah Delano Roosevelt died in 1941, after which Franklin could not bear the thought of returning to this house, and he put it up for sale for $70,000. The house next door went a few years ago for $22 million. So Eleanor, who had never quite felt completely at home here, had been spending more and more time in the Hunter Library, meeting Hunter students, becoming a favorite there, bringing some of them home for grilled cheese sandwiches when she could. And at the urging of the president of Hunter College, she told her husband that this building should really go to Hunter. So, but it was too expensive. So they reduced the price to $60,000. FDR kicked in the extra 10, and Hunter acquired it. It became a club house for the first Hunter clubs, and also a center for women of all nations and races and religions. People learned to speak English here as they arrived from Europe, and remember their first experiences of meeting girls from other backgrounds here. Just to step back a little bit in time, what I think is so meaningful and inspiring today is the knowledge that after FDR came down with polio in 1921 in Canada, his mother wanted him to go back to Hyde Park and sort of rest there in perpetual illness. Eleanor said he should come here. It had an elevator, which is unusual not the one we all use, but a little one which you can look at on your way out. And it gave him a sense of possibility. They designed a wheelchair that could fit into the elevator, and it was the same style of armless wheelchair that he used for the rest of his life. So it was from this place that he developed a sense of a future. And so we're all very moved by that, and by the fact that in sort of the continuum that story represents, we're here today for the screening of Hail. So I just want to acknowledge a few people who have made this possible. Wheeling Forward and Alex Elagutin, I hope I'm saying that right. Close enough? Okay, thank you, Alex. For sponsoring CART, which is so important for our access tonight. Lauren Schechter from Total Caption for providing the real-time captioning, which I hope does not include me. But anyway, it'll be the film. Isaac Smith, the producer of Hail, and the Berkeley Film Foundation. The undergraduate student government, which so generously provided support for the little reception that we had this evening. Brad Bailey, of course, who you'll hear from later, who made this film and made this connection and was generous enough to have this important New York screening here at Roosevelt House. And special shout out to, we have a few students in the audience today, I'm happy to say, so I can't pick favorites, but with a certain wink, I will say that one of my favorite students is here, Edward Friedman, class of 18, Macaulay Honors College student, who is not only a student, but an advocate and an activist committed to improving access for people with disabilities. And he's already had a slew of extraordinary internships, Human Rights Watch, the City Council, the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. He's a member of the College Senate, the Junior Board of Include NYC. I'm not surprised that he plans to pursue a JD and an MPP later. I'm sure he'll take 4 or 5 postgraduate degrees at once because he can do just about anything. So Ed, thank you for all you did. And you'll see the fruits of his work afterwards. So now we can actually lower the lights and see Hail. Thank you.
Sorry about that. So I wanted, before we get started with an excellent array of panelists, I want to thank you for coming out tonight. I know it was cold. I know it's a Friday night and people are busy, but I really think getting this important story out there is a crucial thing. You know, I first met Hail when I was at the UC Berkeley Journalism School, and even before I knew who he was, I knew he was extraordinary. And it was a hot day, and he was trying to communicate to us that he was thirsty. And as you can see, that took a second. And so we finally gave him his drink of water, and then he zoomed away. And I could not get him out of my head. I knew that he was somebody who, there was something about him. And so, you know, a few months passed by. When I found out who he was, I was blown away because he was really just living history, in the embodiment of living history. Everything you see today, from ramps to curb cuts to everything, was really started by this particular group of people in Berkeley, California in the 1970s. And Hail is still alive. He's still advocating for people with disabilities all around the world. And so I want to also thank the people here at Roosevelt House, Mr. Harold Holzer, obviously, who did an extraordinary job. And, excuse me, I'm choking right now. In keeping this together. I also want to thank Mr. Rafael Munoz, whose work here was just extraordinary in getting this done tonight, in addition to a very special man by the name of Edward Friedman. And Edward, could you please stand up? Can you please join me in a round of applause for this man? Edward is somebody who is very special, and his hard work, his dedication, not only in his life and his work here at Hunter, but also in helping this happen tonight, is something I will never forget, and I think, and Hail will never forget, and I think is extraordinary, and he's an extraordinary man, and I'm also looking very forward to his very bright future. So without further ado, we're gonna get started here this evening with an excellent group of panelists. So I wanted to first introduce Mr. Alex Elagutin. Alex, could you please come up? Alex has spent almost a decade working as an advocate and mentor in the disability community. In 2013, when he was a college sophomore, he was in a deer-related car accident and sustained a C6 level spinal cord injury. After becoming paralyzed, he faced an uphill battle to reclaim his independence through working at Hofstra University Law School and became a successful patent attorney. He co-founded Wheeling Forward in 2011 to help others like himself to get support and resources they need to lead active lives. And today, Ella Gooden is the Accessibility Program Manager at the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, where he works on several accessibility initiatives, including the operations of getting the yellow taxi fleet to 50% by 2020, the city accessible dispatch, and FHV sector accessibility policies, among others. Thank you, Alex, for coming tonight. You have to excuse me, I tend to sweat a lot, so I apologize for that. We have Ms. Generose Pope. Can you please come? She worked at Include NYC for over 3 years, bringing her commitment to the equity, access, and inclusion of young people with disabilities to the organization. She is proud to have led the launch of Include NYC's Spanish language website, includenyc.org, and is passionate about reaching and serving NYC's Spanish-speaking disabled community, in addition to depression and PTSD, in addition to New York's diverse community. So thank you for coming tonight. We have Mr. Paraz Shah. Paraz, could you please come up? He's a second-year law student at Harvard Law School, where he serves as the articles editor of the Harvard Human Rights Journal. Legally blind since birth, Shah understands and appreciates the importance of including people with disabilities in all aspects of society. To that end, he interned with the United States Department of Justice and State, helping to advance fundamental rights domestically and abroad. Prior to law school, Shah was the John Gardner Fellow of Human Rights Watch, where he advocated for the rights of refugees with disabilities. Shah received a BA in History and Political Science from UC Berkeley. Go Bears. And then last, but very much so not least, we have Ms. Catherine Bouton. Hi, Catherine, come. Catherine was an editor at the New York Times for 22 years and was deputy editor of the New York Times Magazine from 1998 to 2008. She's the author of Shouting Won't Help, a memoir of adult onset hearing loss and living better with hearing loss. She writes the popular blog Hearing Aids, Hearing Loss, Hearing Help, and she has progressive bilateral hearing loss since 1978. And in September 2009, she received a cochlear implant. Bouton is the president of the New York City chapter of Hearing Loss Association of America and a member of the Hearing Loss Association of America National Board of Trustees. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, perfect. So we'll get started. So thank you guys for coming this evening. And I also want to let you guys know that if you had any questions, we're going to, especially about the film, because I would love to get your input and thoughts about the filmmaking process. We're going to have all those questions at the end, in addition to any other issues you think would be great to have to show up. So great. So we'll get started. First, I want to talk to you. I guess we'll start with the film. In a sense, I want to sort of see what, after watching the film, how far do you think society has come since the beginning of the modern disability rights movement, and what are some of the biggest current challenges to mainstreaming disability that you face in your own life and work? Anyone?
Sure.
Alex, you want to start?
Yeah, I guess I'm the one all the way to the right. I've been disabled for about 15 years, and I still consider myself learning the ropes of being disabled and watching how society goes. I'd say, and I've had quite a journey, working in the private sector and the public sector and nonprofits and advocating, many times working on my own, just not for disability rights, just as an attorney for the world in general. I've seen all different parts of the world and how they receive me. I think from going to school, from getting my education, I think that's come incredibly far. I was treated in college with all kinds of accommodations and help. When I got to law school, it was a little weird because when you're an undergrad, they have lots of accommodations, disability service offices. I got to law school, and the dean called me in on my first day, and she's like, "What help do you need?" I'm like, "I don't know. Don't you guys have a disability services office? Don't you offer service?" She's like, "No, I'm it. Whatever you need, just tell me." And I'm like, "How is that?" She's like, "Well, you're the first student who's a quadriplegic here in the last 12 years. And most of the folks working here weren't there back then." So, you have to do a lot of advocating, and kind of even at that level, they did everything they had to do, everything I asked for. So that part was great because they understand. When I got to the private sector, it's a little trickier because I had a desk. I worked for a judge in a courtroom. The desk, I couldn't get under the desk with the height of my wheelchair. So while I was a fellow for a year and a half, I worked sideways typing, and it was a super kind of antiquish. I'm not going to name the court, but courts can be pretty very nice looking. They don't, the new modern desks don't really fit in their style. I always felt uncomfortable asking, but everybody understood that I was working like this for a year. Got my work done, got a lot of things done. Had a great relationship with the judge. And at that time, I was a little bit more scared to like bring something like that up. I didn't want to be the guy yelling in the office for accommodations and things. But nonetheless, I got through. When you get to a firm and you're working at a firm, they're much more scared of these kind of things. They got me desks and fancy computers and all kinds of things and whatever. So in and of itself, I mean, that suggests some progress. But I'll answer the question in more brief, which is, I work in a position now for the government where I'm an accessibility manager. There was a time where those kind of positions didn't exist, where the government didn't believe that you needed people to work in positions that should help with accessibility. It was the guy who was working on IT that was assigned the accessibility role. It was whoever was dealing with operations that had accessibility on her platform. I think the world is really changing in this way, where people are being brought on to specialize in this. One, from an operations standpoint. Two, from being the face to the community of people with disabilities needing services. So in that way, I do give at least the New York City government, governments across the country, credit for at least being open to the fact that this needs to be worked on. We need to bring people in who specialize in this and do this and think about this all day, not just as some line on a task list for somebody else who has no interest in this. Do we still have a long way to go? Sure. There could be more people with disabilities working in government and IT. Not every person with a disability has to work on disability issues. You know what I mean? I think that is still very much so lacking, just general integration of folks into the workforce, into other areas. So we've come some ways, and I've seen them all up and down, but I think we've got some ways to go.
Jenna Rose?
Yes to all. Yeah, I mean, clearly since the movement began, things have changed significantly. Specifically in that time frame, I think. Granted, it takes a very long time to turn the tide of hundreds of years of discrimination and abuse and just not lack of acknowledgement. But again, yes, I agreed. We have a long way to go. Of course, the seemingly fixable issue are things that people can, put money into, which they generally don't put enough into, to be honest. To fix things that are physical, so cut all of the curves and make those accessible. These are tangible things that we can work on. I think, personally, having an invisible disability, so to speak, there are deeper things. So you can make a building accessible, an event accessible. You can get the ramps and the elevators and all the things that you need, but do you necessarily want to go into that room if the room is full of people who don't acknowledge you as a human being, don't acknowledge the things that you can put a ramp into a room, but do you want to go in there if people are hostile or don't understand your humanity? So I think that's actually the hardest challenges that we face. It's the aspects that are not necessarily tangible, but they are the ones that need to change the most to continue to enable these physical fixes, and nothing's going to really progress beyond that if we don't attack that part.
Faraz?
Well, thank you very much for having me here tonight. It's a real honor to be here with you. There are 1 billion people with disabilities around the world. People with disabilities are the world's largest minority, which means that 1 in 7 of us has some form of disability. And the remarkable thing about disability is that it does not discriminate. No matter what your race, your age, your religion, your creed, you can have a disability, you can acquire a disability at any time. And I think that that's one of the reasons why disability has become a very salient issue in a lot of parts of society, because it touches so many different aspects of our lives: employment, transportation, education. And I think that looking back, Judy Heumann, Ed Roberts, Hale could never imagine the type of progress that they've created so far with the ADA. I'm 24 years old, which means that I have been alive during the entire time that the ADA has been a law. And it's had a remarkable impact in my life because when I was born legally blind, one of the things that my parents insisted on as tremendous advocates was that I could do anything in life. And one thing my father always told me, which has really resonated, was, Paris, these are your rights. You have to claim your rights. And that's a really important thing. When Congress passed the Americans with Disabilities Act, they created a preamble. And in the preamble, they talked about all the different forms of discrimination that are existing in society. So part of what the ADA did is to validate a lot of what people with disabilities feel, the types of stigma that we feel, the isolation that we experience. And the ADA put into law the facts that that is true, and that Congress also sought to create a remedy for that type of discrimination. So one aspect where we still need to do a lot of work is on the international front. And one of the remarkable things about the Americans with Disabilities Act is that it's actually inspired an entire regime of international law to address disability. In 2006, the UN passed a UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and to date, 170 countries have ratified it. So the impact of HAIL really goes across the entire globe.
Thank you, Paras. And Catherine.
Yeah, can you hear me? I'm not sure this microphone is on. Okay. I'm very pleased to be here, first of all, to see the wonderful movie. It's really powerful. But I feel that the movie and Professor Holzer's introduction both said something really important about my disability, which is hearing loss. Professor Holzer said he hoped that his introduction wasn't being recorded on the cart screen. If it wasn't recorded on the cart screen, I wouldn't have known what you were saying, nor would some of my colleagues here who have hearing loss. And in the film, there were so many incidences where I, as a person with hearing loss, would have been completely lost. In the BART station with all those oral announcements going on, I only knew they were going on because Lauren told me so in her cart captions. In the meeting of people with disabilities, I didn't see anybody providing any hearing assistance. There was one other really remarkable absence of an acknowledgement that people with hearing loss, even with, as I have a cochlear implant, really the highest possible form of technology, and a really fancy, incredibly expensive hearing aid, and I still can't hear from sitting in the third row here, somebody here. I can't hear any announcements in the subways. I cannot go to a hearing at City Hall because City Hall does not have hearing access of a kind that benefits me and other people with the kind of hearing loss I have. We're working on that. The Disabilities Commissioner, Victor Calisi, is very aware of hearing loss as a disability. But I think many, many, many people aren't. And it affects an enormous number of people. 48 million Americans have some form of hearing loss. And internationally, I believe the number is 250 million people worldwide have, according to the World Health Association, disabling hearing loss. They are not able to live their lives with their hearing loss, and they have, for the most part, no correction. So I consider myself lucky. I can ask for CART, and very often Lauren's available. On the other hand, this week, for instance, I spent a lot of time in a veterinary hospital because I had a pet who was sick. And my dog had something contagious, and everybody was wearing masks. I mean, this happens in human hospitals, too. I couldn't understand what people were saying to me, and, you know, they didn't. Finally, one of them pulled down his mask, and he was a Sikh, and he had a big mustache and a huge beard, and so I still couldn't understand any of these things because I couldn't read his lips. So Tony Iaccolucci, who's sitting here in the audience, and one of her colleagues is working on a way to provide access to medical care. My experience this week is so minor compared to somebody like me or like Tony, going into an emergency room, having nobody realize that you can't hear, especially if you're not conscious, Tony has an amazing story of having some waking up from surgery, and somebody was like basically shaking her, saying, and the only way that she knew that they were talking to her was because they shook her visibly, and they forgot that she couldn't hear anything. So it's really it's a tricky disability. I don't look disabled. I don't talk disabled. I didn't really lose my hearing until about 20 years ago. But I have a really hard time in daily life. So
That again is one of the reasons we wanted to do the film, to show again that there's a range of challenges that people face every single day, and it goes to almost to my next question. What do you think the role is of stigmas and misconceptions, and I guess the term is ableism, able-bodied privilege, with regard to people with disabilities, and how do you work to mitigate or deal with these issues in your daily lives? And I'm gonna throw that out there, and I will also want you guys to also interact. So, so if you see a question, you want to pop in, so you don't have to, wait for me, and just go right at it. So,
Sure. Can I ask a question? Is there a time limit on our responses? I mean,
well, we have a few more minutes. Don't worry, I'll rein you back in. If
all
I
right.
need to.
Let me know. I mean, especially on a topic like this, I could talk for a pretty long time. Before I touch on stigmas and things, I mean, one thing that I personally enjoyed about the movie, I can really relate, is like that opening scene with all the help that he needs. I mean, as a quadriplegic, that really hits home for me. When I get to work and I go about my business and I'm in meetings all day or whatever, nobody thinks that in the morning I have to go through something very similar to what Hale has to go through, in terms of the help and the assistance. And you could watch something like that as an able-bodied person, as a friend, as an employer, as a colleague, as whatever, and be like, holy cow, like how in 2 hours are you going to go out there and start working and producing and be a functional human being? But fortunately, due to technology, human innovation, human motivation, inspiration, and drive, there is a way, and human compassion, right? It's not that it's not that I don't ever need help at work or in the workplace, you know what I mean? But that is incredibly true. So many of the folks that you see out there in chairs go through something similar, and sometimes even more so, every morning and every night, and sometimes several times throughout the day. And I want to bring it to light because I think, for me, it's the hardest part of my day. The morning is the toughest part. Once you throw me in my chair, literally throw me in my chair, I'm all right. You know what I mean? I can make it. I can go about my stuff. But that moment before, and if my aide doesn't show up or something else doesn't happen, I'll be in that bed for the day. You know what I mean? And I had many of those days in my life, but I always know that tomorrow someone will show up and I can make it through. I don't know if that's a good way to go about it, or just means I'm a really bad planner. But those days really give you perspective on how terrible this could be, and also on how fortunate you are to get up the next day. Specifically on the topic of stigmas and being out in the world, I mean, I think in college is where I felt it the most. In every class, pretty much. I would be the guy in the wheelchair sitting in the corner. I never took a class in 7 years of school where there was another wheelchair user in it. And I went to Brooklyn College and Carnegie Mellon and a couple other places, but I always happened to be the only one. And before I spoke, nobody would talk to me. People would be kind of like, okay, this guy in the wheelchair. Whatever the first day that happened to be that I raise my hand and respond, at the end of class, I'd have a line of 10 people standing next to me, one at a time. Oh my God, you're so smart. Wow, that was really fantastic what you said today. You know what I mean? And I always knew that would happen after the first time I spoke, because they don't expect you to articulate. And always my most famous or my favorite social experiment was when you have group activities, and if it was before I spoke, nobody would ever want me in their group. They weren't sure. And then if they knew that I would speak and articulate, everybody's like, oh, come, be in my group, please, please, please. So there's a lot of that, you know what I mean?
I want you in my group.
Thank you, see? Would you have said that if I had spoken? No, just
100%.
Just kidding. It's something that for me, I'm fortunate. I'm able to communicate, and I know that I do feel lucky and very blessed to have that. But you know, if I'm with a friend, people still talk to the person next to me first. I mean, all those kind of things still go on. I really believe that even people, I never respond negatively or aggressively or angrily at all, period. I really don't believe that anyone is evil towards disability, hates people with disabilities. I think some people are unaware. You know, at the organization Wheeling Forward, we always say we wish everybody had a brother in a wheelchair. We mean that in the good way, because those people who are around it, who are familiar with it, they get it. I can go into a restaurant, a store, any public accommodation, know within 2 seconds whether that person has a relative in a wheelchair. They know exactly how the chair moves, how the table needs to go, exactly how many inches I need to get by. And that doesn't make those people better than the other ones who are kind of ignorant towards our needs. It just means we have seen them enough or been around them enough. And that's what I really believe. I don't take it personally. I try to educate that person, no matter how much of a transgression their action may or may not be. And I try to roll through the world in that way. Obviously, sometimes it's naive. There are really some nasty folks out there, but I believe they're equal opportunity nasty folks, and they would be nasty to anyone. So that being said, that's kind of my take on the stigma question.
Very good. Yes, Catherine.
Yeah, I think you have a visible disability, and I think Gen Rose might relate to this too. I think if you have an invisible disability, and invisible disabilities include things like psychological disabilities, you know, fear of being in small places. It also includes things like
Fear of being on panels.
epilepsy, you know, just a lot of things that you don't really see. And I think those conditions are, first of all, there's a huge stigma associated with almost all of the invisible disabilities. So people don't want to talk about them. And so often they don't get the accommodations they need just because they haven't talked about them. So one thing we have to do, I think, is realize that, you know, the person next to you may be behaving really strangely, like maybe say, no, I'm sorry, I can't help you move that 40-pound desk because I have a bad back. Well, maybe she actually has, you know, a really bad back, and we should just believe that person instead of dismissing every excuse. Nobody ever believes me when I say I can't hear them. And then when they finally realize I can't hear them, then they say, oh, never mind, it doesn't matter. So, you know, I think invisible disabilities are something that we really need to keep in mind, and they're harder, much harder to accommodate, but they need to be. And just one more, I think there's also a lot of confusion about, at least my disability, hearing loss. I can't tell you how many times somebody has offered me an ASL interpreter, or I have put on an airline reservation that I have a disability hearing loss, and they meet me at the plane with a wheelchair. People just don't understand. So
See, they never gave me a wheelchair, though.
I don't know.
Jenna Rose.
Sure, yeah, I'll piggyback on that. I guess a really good, like I said, fear of panels, and I'm actually not kidding about that. So I'm trying very hard to focus and
You can always look
be
at me.
engaged in.
Just
Thank you. Yes, you're very calming. Humor is the way I deal with things, obviously, when I'm not losing my train of thought, freaking out. But now I have the support that I need. Also, this is sort of a safe space environment, you know. And also, Edward is amazing, and I would do anything for him. So here I am. Also, the nature of my job is more accommodating than your average job, though not as accommodating as you would think. There's still the, you know, well, you really need to get over this. Like, just do it. You just have to go out and do it, conquer your fear. And I'm like, well, it's not exactly like that. If I could just conquer my fear, then I wouldn't be 38 and, you know, sweating all over your desk and unable to deal with public speaking in most instances. I mean, that's a very large underestimation of the things that I deal with on a daily basis, but another illustration, of the role of stigmas, misconception, and ableism in my life is that this is the first time publicly, not in a therapeutic setting, that I have really talked about the role of disability plays in my life. When I first started working in my organization 3.5 years ago, it didn't even occur to me that the things that I dealt with were disabilities, so to speak. It just was not the way that I was taught or how I viewed it, and pull yourself up from your bootstraps, et cetera, even though I'd gotten treatment finally at that point, which is what I think started to help me come to terms with that. I've worked with people with disabilities my whole life in various forms and had no problem acknowledging that, but not my own. And so, thankful serendipity happened to come about where this job came into my life at the right time, and here I am, so I'm able to be here and talk about it. But the reason why it took, like I said, 38 years to get to this point is because of ableism in a sense, and the stigmas and the misconceptions, even for the people with disabilities themselves. The misconception you have about yourself and how you present to the world and how you think, the way that you view yourself, it's super complex. But
No, that's an interesting point, because with the film, I've had people, especially in the editing process, when I was showing them who Hale was, they were like, well, is he 100% there? And I'm like, are you kidding? I'm like, he's smarter than both of us. I had to sort of let that person know that just because he may look a certain way, it had nothing to do with his intelligence. And obviously, when that same person ended up seeing the film later, they actually apologized to me, because I think they realized that you just can't judge anyone by no book can be judged by its cover. Where there's disability, where there's race, where there's gender, where there's anything. And I think that's an important point.
And just to jump in with no judgment, also, often sometimes somebody with a physical disability has an intellectual disability as well, and that's okay.
That's okay. Paras?
So this is a really interesting distinction that's come up between invisible disabilities and visible disabilities, and I'd like to collapse that a little bit. So for me, in most situations, I can pass as able-bodied, and you probably wouldn't be able to tell immediately that I have a visual impairment unless you tried to make eye contact, or I had to look closely at my phone, or some other giveaway. So a lot of the time I can pass through the world as an able-bodied person, and about 2 years ago I was working in Midtown, and I was taking the Chambers Street Metro uptown, and I was getting very frustrated because sometimes it's really hard to see the trains or see the signs or figure out where I'm going in a complex travel situation. So I was wearing a suit, going back home from work, and I took my cane out of my gym bag, and as soon as I unfolded it, you could tell, it was almost perceptible, you could tell the shift in people's attitudes. These are New Yorkers at 6 p.m. who have a lot of places to be, and usually I'm just some professional 20-something traveling around. And then as soon as I took my cane out, 2 very kind-hearted elderly women came up, grabbed me by each arm, and directed me towards the wrong train. with the best of intentions. But I really didn't need to go downtown. I was trying to go uptown. And it's just one sort of example where this happens all the time. And I had to very kindly and politely tell them I just needed to be pointed in the right direction. So I think there's also a certain degree of destigmatization that we as people with disabilities have to do. There's a level of education that we have to do. And I'm very fortunate that I have a lot of great friends who are really great allies for me too, and really just have it down as far as what I need and how to help. And part of my role there is just educating people and telling them this is what I need, this is what I don't need. And another interesting experience was one time I was also guiding a colleague who was fully blind, and I found it just as complicated and confusing, and I thought, wow, I don't know, what can she see? How do I get around this? Do I tell her what direction to go? How do I do this? And so I understand where people are coming from, and as other panelists have mentioned, I think most people have good intentions, and we have to educate people and create a more inclusive environment.
Absolutely. Catherine?
I think you said something really important about Hale, and that's true of all visible disabilities, and also once people understand your invisible disability, about that perception as well, which is that until you prove that you can do it. Everybody thinks, you know, your one handicap has sort of resulted in your entire mental and bodily handicap. So I think, you know, I think it's a it's circular. It's really hard. People who have stigmas, you know, prefer not to talk about them if they don't have to, because then, I mean, it's not stigmas. If people who have disabilities prefer not to talk about them because they know they'll be perceived as something they aren't. In my case, you know, with hearing loss is associated with being old, it's associated with dementia and cognitive impairment. And, you know, who wants somebody to think that you're old or cognitively impaired before they've even had a chance to get to know you? So that's why I think it's really important to have events like this for everybody to talk out. I mean, I think this whole audience is probably already perfectly aware that people with disabilities are just as smart as everybody else. But that is a really hard misperception to overcome on a daily basis, I think, probably for everybody. Even, I mean, in a wheelchair, it doesn't affect your brain.
Yeah, it seems clear, but you know, it comes with a package. You know, and I don't mean that in the way of it actually comes with a package. It comes with a perception. I feel like people with physical and visible disabilities, like myself, we're kind of working our way up to try to gain the belief of those who are judging us. And again, I can't speak for folks with disabilities, but I'll say it with invisible disabilities. Sometimes they're trying to get that message across that we need the help, and they're not working down, but they're trying to say, just don't be shocked by the fact that I might need a little help or I'm a little bit different just because visually you weren't expecting it. And it's all about the expectation and perception. And with us, the perception is, you know, we got nothing. And with the other way, folks aren't ready to understand that some people are a little bit different, have different abilities. So I don't think either way is pleasant to deal with, but it's part of our everyday life.
So this summer, especially with the sort of discussion about repealing the Affordable Care Act, disability has always been front page news, but it really became, the protest aspect of disability became front page news. And it's sort of, when I was looking at those headlines, I was obviously remembering back to the 1977 protests, and obviously protests over the years, in a sense. But in a way, we haven't gotten back there yet, in a sense. And I wanted to get your take on that protest spirit, in a way, and whether or not you think it needs to come back the way it was before.
I think 100%. I mean, that protest spirit is what's needed in every battle, civil rights battle, specifically with people with disabilities. There's so many of us, as mentioned, we're the largest minority, but we as a community, for whatever reason, and I'm just going to speak as an advocate, as a person who runs an organization, struggle with coming together, being a force of numbers, getting critical mass. Some of that is just good old physical barriers in terms of, you can take a bus of 80 people down to DC and it's pretty straightforward. That's one bus. If you needed 80 people in wheelchairs to get down to DC, you'd probably need like 20 buses. You know what I mean? And it also depends where you're going and what you're doing. And there are barriers, but honestly, that's not the biggest one. I think there is segregation in the disability community. Even amongst people with disabilities, the folks with MS have their foundations and what they do. The folks with SCI, who are myself, paralyzed, we have our organizations and we have what we do. The hearing impaired folks do what they do. And there is nothing, candidly, from being an advocate that binds us and calls us together, although reductions in healthcare spending and healthcare affect us all in a very similar way. At Wheeling Forward, at my organization, we really have a belief, and part of our mission statement is, regardless of what your disability is, there is more that binds us than separates us. I mean, especially in the physical world, MD, ALS, MS, SCI, post-polio, I mean, the list goes on, amputees, we're all very similar. And we run our programs in a way where it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference for people with DD, developmental disabilities, and things of that nature, but we need that spirit. I believe that specifically in local government, and I work in it, if there was a group of 20 people in wheelchairs standing outside of the agency that I work for, you better believe that the commissioner and everybody else down will call everybody into the office and try to accommodate. Nobody likes having a group of folks in wheelchairs standing outside saying they're not getting served. It's bad for public perception. And culturally, the folks that work in high management and executive positions now understand, even culturally, and they feel it, that we're doing something wrong. And it really works, and I don't believe we do it enough. It's incredibly powerful. I could work at my agency for 2 years, but 20 people outside of the agency protesting or saying something will achieve more in that one day than I could probably do in 2 years.
Catherine, what do you think?
Well, I think one thing that you're starting to get at is that each disability has different requirements for accommodations. And even within hearing loss, my disability requirement are nothing like what a deaf person's are. You know, a deaf person needs ASL. I need captioning. And a lot of people also would like to have auditory help in the form of loops. So, you know, even within my little bit of a community, we aren't cohesive. But I think that one of the things that you see in this movie is the spirit of, and what led to the ADA is the spirit of people with all different disabilities managing to get together. We can't lobby for accommodations for our own specific things and be really inclusive. But what we can do is just sort of raise people's consciousness, make sure that people know, you know, how many different kinds of disabilities there are, and also all be supportive of each other. We always, HLA always has people at the Disability Pride Parade, and you know, it's really great for us to be there because most people don't think of us as being part of them. So I think that's a really good thing for us to try to do. I also think, and if I could just say one more thing.
Sure.
We shouldn't have to get together and ask and demand. I mean, how many years is it since the ADA was passed? It's ridiculous that, you know, that even we're very involved with city government and trying to get, and the city has passed a couple of pretty good laws in the past few years that affect people with hearing loss and also people with disabilities in general, like making sure that there's a disability advocate in every state agency, city agency. But why is that only being done now? And, you know, I mean, and why is it that you still have to get 20 people outside a building in wheelchairs to make a point? And why is it that, you know, we have to ask every single time for hearing accommodation? It's just, it's very frustrating.
No, you're right. Jenna Rose or Cross?
I absolutely think that we need the level of protest and forcefulness. Listening to Judith when she was younger, that clip when she was younger, her talking, I don't think you understand what I'm saying, even though you're nodding at me, like, just so clear. I think there's so much in the whole, you know, with every movement sort of comes this whole, like, politically correct adjustment, and then people don't think it's a problem anymore because, you know, there aren't visible, it's not as visible anymore, and so people think that it's solved, like there's no sexism and there's no racism, you know, intersectionality, hey. As soon as that dialogue and that straightforwardness goes away, then people think that it's no longer a problem, and I think that with all this pussyfooting around the actual language and the discussion, that things get lost in the shuffle, and there's so much more work to do. And I think that, unfortunately, one of the, if not the only, beneficial side effects of the current political climate, if you can guess my politics, is this kind of resurgence of people feeling the need to protest and speak plainly like this again. And I'm hoping to all possible deities that this is going to be a trend and that we all unite. Again, intersectionality has never been so relevant, and that's why there's a term for it now, I suppose. Because like they said in the documentary, you know, if you fight for the rights of one group of people, you fight for the rights of all people, and that's really where we need to go right now.
Last but definitely not least, Paras.
Yeah, just piggybacking off the last comment. I agree that we need to have a higher level of protest, but I really think what needs to happen is that the disability movement needs to be folded into and integrated among other existing social movements. So with Black Lives Matter, there's been a lot of attention on race. But what people aren't talking about is the fact that, and the ways in which disability and race also intersect to create multiple forms of discrimination. So people with disabilities are far disproportionately higher to be in jail. People with mental health conditions are far more likely to be arrested, shot, experience violence from the police. There's a complete lack of accommodations in that process. And no one's talking about how that is impacting these types of situations. So what the movements really need to do, I think, is have a hard look and figure out how do we integrate these issues? How do we talk about these issues? How do we find commonality between what we're all experiencing?
And the last question, and one of the unfortunate things about these discussions is that they're so short because there's so much to cover. But I would definitely want to ask the last question. What do you want the audience to sort of take away from this evening? If there was one quick thing in a nutshell that you wanted them to take away either from the film or your discussion or just another point, what is it? Who's first?
Sure. I mean, I guess I've been going first all night, right? So might as well keep going. That's a really tough question. The movie itself covers so many different topics on disability, humanity, life, advocacy. I would just say, I want everybody to really understand the human element of what we go through. Yes, it takes us a little bit longer to get ready in the morning, a little bit longer to do this. Yes, I have to eat with a special fork, or, do things very much differently than what you do. But in reality, even comparing to myself before my disability, I was hurt at 19 years old. I enjoy many of the same things I enjoyed before, the kinds of places I like to go, the music I like, trips, the world, vacation, food. It's all very similar. Obviously, it took me many, many years to adapt, but there is a human element, and we are very much like you in understanding our struggle. And I look at able-bodied privilege. To me, is not an able-bodied privilege. One of the things that drives me craziest is when a friend or my mother is scared to tell me she has a headache because she knows that my pain is worse. I'm like, Mom, it's fine. I can take it. I can still be compassionate. It makes me feel more disabled when you don't tell me. You know what I mean? And, we're human. We're just like everyone else. We do things differently. Please be compassionate. Please be patient. In New York, patience toward disability is one of the biggest problems when you're getting on a bus or a subway or anywhere else. So I would definitely ask for some patience. And in terms of helping us, just ask. There are many people in wheelchairs or with disabilities. They don't want to be helped at all. And many are like, hey, you want to grab my chair and push me 2 blocks? By all means. But you'll never figure it out by looking at someone. You know what I mean? Because we are all different. And even people in disabilities, in wheelchairs, can be pretty angry. And if you grab their chair, they'll tell you not to do so. But save yourself that by just asking. So we're human, passion, compassion, and we're all the same.
Similarly, our needs are not special. They're the same needs as everyone else. We need love, we need education, we need access, we need community, we need all of those things. So, I mean, just personally, just stop saying special needs. Come on, it's disability. They're not special needs. And when one group of people can't have their needs met, everyone suffers.
I'll sum it up in one word, which is engage. So engage with us, have dialogue, create conversation. We'll question our biases, you'll question your biases, and together we'll get closer.
Catherine?
Gosh, I don't know. There's so much to say. I guess I think the most important thing, and I think the thing that is so important about your film, is don't judge people by their conditions. And Hale is an incredibly powerful, intelligent, successful advocate. And, when the film first started, I thought, I had probably the same response that everybody else has. How can he go through life like that? And then what the film makes you see is that he goes through life like that because that's his life, and he's going to do it. So I guess I have a feeling that everybody here is pretty sympathetic to people with disabilities. So I don't think anybody needs a lot of reminders about being open-minded, not prejudging people, and also I think doing the most you can to help with access, and that doesn't mean pushing Alex's wheelchair. It means making sure that the curb cuts are there. So.
Well, we have a few more minutes for Q&A. So if any of you have any questions, not just about the film, but also about some of the issues that sort of came up this evening, we'd love to hear them. A few more minutes we have. So yeah, and we have a great microphone from back here. So if anybody has any quick questions, I would love to hear it. And, could you also just say who you are and your name and where you're from?
Thank you so much. My name is Lizzie Reese. I am actually teaching a class on the politics of disability at Macaulay Honors College right now, and Edward's in my class, and he's a fabulous student. I'll just add that. Thank you so much for organizing this. So my question is two questions. One is about the film's availability, because I would actually love to show this in my class if I could maybe arrange that. And also, I'm wondering what Hale thinks about how the film turned out.
Well, on that second one, I've learned a long time ago I don't talk for Hale. So I will get in a lot of trouble for that. So I'm going to see him next week, and I think we'll hopefully have him potentially say something publicly about his thoughts on the film and just his impact. One thing is, though, he has had a lot of people now interrupt him as he's going about his daily life. The film ended up getting, well, to tell you, we won a Student Academy Award for it, the gold medal for that. So that was helpful. And I was surprised because there were a lot of films that were submitted this year, and I think one of the important aspects of that is that it raised awareness for the issue, not just the issues of disability, but also for Hale. He's somebody who I believe has been overlooked all these years, and to have somebody just riding our streets who affects the way we even interact with the world, it's just he has to be acknowledged. And when I there was a sense of urgency that I had when I did the film, and so now he's probably gonna tell me off, but he's getting interrupted now all the time from people who see him on his daily route, and they're like they stop to thank him. So I'm waiting for that email coming soon from him. But no, in terms of the availability, it's we'll see. We're chatting with people. Right now it's on the film festival circuit. So we just played in Savannah last weekend for the film festival there, and St. Louis actually also last weekend. So I'm heading to St. Louis tomorrow for I think the end of their film festival and their awards section. And I want to be able to, when this is done, be able to give this out, essentially. This is not a money-making process for me. It's to give it out to advocacy groups around the world and for them to use as they see fit, for educators, for people who need to show that this man, A, for two reasons. This man, A, exists and he is living history, and then B, people are capable of anything. And and to show that if Hale can do it, I can do it. Or anybody can get up and have just sort of live their lives, because we only have one. And that was a goal with that. So thank you. Yes. We have a couple here, and then this young man right here.
Hi, my name is Linda. I am a graduate student at the School of Professional Studies for Disability Services in Higher Education. My question was a little bit technical. What was the last word Hale said at the end of the documentary? Because I'm used to, I'm very used to seeing subtitles, and I'm very used to looking at both things at the same time. So I was kind of hoping that the last word would have been spelled out and then said at the very end. So I was having a hard time comprehending what was
Absolutely.
what was his last words.
His last words was cramped. He's like, I didn't want my style cramped. And so, you know, we had so many conversations. This filming process took about 6 months, you know, because it was my thesis at UC Berkeley, and I'd met Hale that previous April. And then, and I'm gonna be full disclosure here, my grandfather was in the process of passing away, and I lived in California and he's in Georgia. We're from Georgia. And so I was literally commuting, doing that. So my mind was just in craziness, and I had no time for anything. And so when I first met Hale, I didn't have the patience, because I was like, what is he trying to say? What is this all about? And I think it didn't resonate with me until much later, until that summer where I sat in the nursing home with my grandfather, and I didn't learn patience, but something just transformed in me, in a sense, in that period of time. And then when my grandfather passed away that September, I think I was a very different person. And so when I met back up with Hale, we understood each other in a very different way than we had when I'd met him that April. And we were able to talk, and we sat for hours and hours and just talked. And I probably shot over 40 to 50 hours of footage. And you know, I guess it came up with just a 20-minute film, but that's okay, because, you know, for me, it was our time together to just sort of get to know each other. And he's brilliant, so he understood that process, and he knew something had changed in me. And my goal was to show the process of transformation I had in 6 months in 20 minutes to other people. Like, that was my goal in the film. So
I can answer her question,
Yeah,
because I had the benefit of Lauren Schuchter's captions. The last words were thin line, and I didn't really understand. No, she's shaking her head. But I didn't really understand what the last line meant. And it was something about, one thing I've learned is that we're on either side of a thin line. So what did he mean by that?
Thank you. It was actually shot almost a year ago. Actually, it was over winter break that scene was shot. We walked in and asked Hale about suicide, you know, because suicide is a human condition, period. And I'd asked him about it, because I felt I'd known him long enough to do so. And he's very forthright. He really was. He didn't hesitate giving me a very honest answer. And he told me we're all, you know, he's on the other side of that thin line. But guess what? Hale just isn't on the other side of the thin line. We all are. You know, we all are one step away from another possibility. And I think Hale sort of brought that out. That shows his brilliance, in a sense, that he's able to articulate that is very existential. We're all on that thin line, and that he definitely was, and that, you know, his hope and his optimism was why he never went through with that, and why he kept living and kept waking up every morning to keep doing what he does for 40 years, you know, just with disability, you know, and everything else. He's 74 years old. So that was what you're right. In the beginning, I didn't get it, but it took me a beat later to get it, and then it stuck with me for a while. So, any other questions? You have a question, young man. Oh, sorry, over here. Sorry, Keith.
Did you try to invite to this panel a representative from Mayor's Office for Disability? I'm trying to get any answer, not appointment, but even for last 25 years. About a month ago, I called and still waiting for any answer.
Well, I think Edward, we actually did try to chat with some folks from the mayor's office. So maybe after the panel, we can talk with Edward and see who we can get in contact with. Or Alex?
Sure. If you have questions or need the mayor's office, I'm happy to relay the message.
But how to leave a message? I left a message. They don't answer. How to reach them?
We can talk after the panel. I'll help.
What's
you
your name?
find-
What's your nice to meet you.
Hi, my name is Dan. I work at Hunter College's Office of Accessibility, which is the Disability Services Office. And I wanted to say I really enjoyed the film, but my question is actually more for the panel. So all of you have alluded to like separate and differing disabilities. And as most of us know, and I'm really surprised when other people don't know, disabilities is not a monolithic block. There's not one organization for all the disabilities, but you guys have alluded to the fact that, you know, things might be better if there was this overarching organization. And I'm just kind of curious, Is that even possible considering the disparate nature of disabilities? And if it is possible, how you guys would build it?
General Rose, you want to
I
answer?
just have a clarifying question. By organization, what do you mean? Like coming together?
Many nonprofits. Yeah, yeah.
My apologies. So I was referring to your individual organizations, and there's so many more. And at times, I always felt like some of those organizations worked at crossroads, differing disabilities, differing needs. The pie for the resource pie is always the same, so everyone gets a small sliver. But we all talk about working together, and sometimes I find that's a little bit more difficult than the lip service that we should all work together. So I was wondering if it's possible to build a more cohesive, overarching disability organization.
You have a few minutes, yeah, so I know it's a long question, but
Yeah,
maybe in a
just
quick
really
nutshell.
quickly. I mean, age-wise, we're specific 0 to 26, but include NYC actually is an organization that serves all disabilities across the board. Advocacy and resources. Include NYC.org. You can learn more about us.
Sure. I mean, my thought on this is as a somebody who runs an organization and has been involved in many. I think there's some uniqueness in disability. If you look at the LGBT movement, they're like super unified, like the model movement in terms of how they've been able to come up, and I think they're very closely related. Their interests, the civil rights movements of like Black Americans and kind of the Black movement, also very unified. I mean, somebody like myself, and you can hear it on this panel, between somebody who's visually impaired, somebody who is hearing impaired, we do have different needs, and we need to, I need wheelchair access, I need an elevator and a ramp. Nobody in here, other than me and the wheelchair folks, care about that. Not that you don't care, but you don't need it, right? I don't need CART, right? But somebody else does. And those unique, everything that I just named costs a lot of money in different ways, and makes our interests kind of divergent. I think we all care about each other, but it's just there is a very significant difference that has led to us fundraising, gaining money. A bill that helps someone that's hearing impaired, unless you're talking about the ADA, generally doesn't help somebody like myself, and it's just the true nature of it, and it's very hard to I wish there was a big monolith, organization that had a committee on hearing, loss and committee on visual impaired, and we could all just funnel our money. But it's a little bit tougher out there when you're competing and you're working with your groups, and that's on the very real human level, very different, but legally at the Washington federal government level, very similar. Yet very difficult for us to come together. So that's my thought.
I think there are a number of places where we actually do come together. And right now, for instance, the New York State Judiciary has just formed a panel to discuss accessibility in the judicial system. And so that panel is made up of people from, sort of every disability they could think of. There's 18 of them, so I'm sure they've left a lot of disabilities out. But so they're working, that is a completely disparate group of people with different interests, and I'm sure, when they actually get this commission going, everybody's going to be, battling for their own need. But
height adjustable desks.
At least they're, but to answer everyone who asked the question, I don't really think there is a way for us all to come together, except in things, like parades and because
panels.
I think, the resources are very limited, and we're all trying to get the one that we.
I'm optimistic. If they can
So-
do it, I think it can be done. Oh, I really do. And we have time for one final last question. And could you please stand? Oh, sorry.
Hi, my name is Milagros Franco. I work for the Brooklyn Center for the Independence of the Disabled. I want to piggyback on what Alex said. I think also part of the problem that keeps us separate, not only because of our different needs, but because of attitudinal barriers, and we're so busy fighting over that same funding of money, and that's what separates us. If we could find a common goal, such as housing, that everyone needs, and fight together as a group, instead of just thinking about hearing loss people in chairs If we can just come together on that, we would have a better chance. But we're so busy trying to stay alive in our own group that we forget the power of cohesiveness.
Thank you very much.
Agreed.
Seriously. And on that wonderful and very important last note, thank you. That's it. I want to thank you guys for coming out this evening. And can we please give our panelists a wonderful round of applause, please. Please. They're badass. So I want to wish you all a wonderful evening. And if you have any questions, by all means, I will give out my information to any of you. And have a safe trip home. Thank you.